Hello there, good morning. It's 10 o'clock and welcome back to another edition of Front Page with me, Noah Keate. This is a space where every week I reflect on the events that have defined the previous 7 days. And as we've looked at over the last 9 weeks, there have been plenty of those to occupy our time and begin the discussion. There are so many things that have happened over the last 9 weeks. And as well as reflecting on those events that have defined the previous week since we last met, I like to try and look towards the next 7 days, try and, make a prediction and see what could possibly happen then. And I think as we've seen over the last 9 weeks, those predictions can only really be speculations. We can imagine what might happen, but in reality, I don't think we can ever be truly sure. It makes me think of the time just before the Brexit referendum, before the US election in 2016, and the UK general elections in 2017 and 2019. We had media, political commentators, individuals, including myself, obviously on a smaller perspective. I wasn't lucky enough to appear on Newsnight, though who knows what could happen in the future. All of us making our own predictions about what the results would be. Now, a small amount of people getting it right, but often many people getting it completely wrong, not getting it at all. So I think we have to accept that speculation can only ever be speculation. As well as my reflections, I'll also take a look at the morning papers, lots of them on the same topic this week. As we've seen over the last 9 weeks, it can really vary. Some weeks exactly the same topic will always be covered. You'll have it across all the papers, even the Financial Times and the Daily Star will cover it, and if they cover it, it's a big issue. But in other weeks, there's been more of a variation, which I've quite enjoyed. It shows that newspapers have had to sort of make a judgment. People that are unlucky enough to work at their offices on the Sunday to prepare the Monday edition, it shows that they have to make a judgment over what they think will sell and what they believe to be important. And of course, that varies from paper to paper, depending on what their target readership is. So we'll have a look at what's in the papers, what's on the front pages, and also what isn't on the front pages, because sometimes certain issues are raised, they're the front bit of attention, and that's the detriment of other issues, which can either be ignored and put later in the paper, page 12 or 13, by which time a reader is probably, slightly sort of bored and probably just quickly scanning over articles rather than reading an article in depth like they might do on the front page. Or an article might not appear at all, a story might not be covered, and it's important that we understand what newspapers do choose to cover, but also what they decide to not cover as well. As well as the papers, though, we'll do what we always have done and have some cultural recommendations. I'll have my book of the week, my podcast of the week, and a tweeter of the week who I believe deserves your time and attention. I've been a bit more selective over the last few weeks about spending time on Twitter, because much as I love Twitter, and it's probably one of the words I've used the most over these last 9 weeks, I have recognised that it can get quite draining, constantly clicking on the app, just never knowing what's going to be said. It can be, public discourse. There can also be great arguments. It can be funny, amusing, but it can also be a horrific place with loads of vile abuse and people unable to disagree in a clear and coherent way. And it's a difference of opinion in a proper manner. So I have been selective. I've sometimes woken up and thought, I'm not going to look at Twitter or the internet until later in the evening. And actually that has been really beneficial. So while I appreciate the sort of social mediums of Twitter and other places, I realise that you do have to be selective. But having said that, I will give my tweeter of the week. And of course, I'll have your comments too. We're 9 weeks into doing this, and I've still sort of never fully mastered StreamYard. This should be going out live on the Raw News Facebook page and the Raw News YouTube channel too. So do comment down below on anything that I have to say. I'd love to hear whether you agree with me, whether you completely disagree with me, whatever your thoughts and opinions on the matters that we're discussing. I'd love to know that. And it could also be on a story that I've not covered, an issue that I've not raised that you think deserves attention. Put it in the comments and I'll read it out. And then that way, hopefully more people will learn about it. And we'd love to sort of continue those discussions. But as always, along with all of those cultural recommendations things, I've got to have my tea and the different mugs that have been used. I think we've had a good few that have been used over the 9 weeks. So that does sort of help split the show up, because it's been fun doing it without sort of playing any music or having any adverts, but it is remarkable. Anyway, back to the main issues of the day. I do digress as usual. It is 4 minutes past 10. Got the first time check in there. And I want to begin today by talking about the lockdown. Indeed, I sort of want to end today, or start today where we started on that very first show 9 weeks ago, where we talked about coronavirus. We began doing this at the end of April, and the issue that we were discussing may have been discussing something like this, but the issue I really want to discuss today is about the inequalities of lockdown, because it is one of the phrases I hate the most. Some people say that the coronavirus and the lockdown across the world has been this great leveller, because it really hasn't. Some people have done very well economically. Of course, the coronavirus, the virus, could hit anyone. It doesn't discriminate, but there clearly has not been equality in who has been affected by the impacts of coronavirus through the lockdown and other government policies that have taken place. One of the inequalities I quickly wanted to raise was that of educational inequality. It's a subject I've got a lot of passion for, education, whether it's primary education, secondary education, and of course the form I know the most about currently, higher education, given that if you're a student at the University of Warwick, we're all in higher education together at the moment, and really the inequalities that exist within education as a result of coronavirus. We saw from the UK at least that they're going to announce £1 billion that they'll be investing in education, and £700 billion of that will be sort of general spending, and £300 million of that will be sort of tutoring to help those that are the most disadvantaged as a result of schools closing. Now, schools never fully shut. They did remain open for vulnerable students and the children of key workers. But to have, the education system pretty much put on pause for 3 months is going to have set children back years. It won't just be a term's work they'll have missed. That sort of barrier to learning that so many face because of their economic and social circumstances will have been really exacerbated. There's already enough of an issue over the summer holiday. We have it for 6 weeks here in the UK. I know for America, it can be nearer to 3 months, and it is remarkable how much a child can easily forget. And of course, there'll be differences within that in terms of how children spend their summer holidays. Some will go to some form of summer school, some will go on holiday with their parents to brilliant countries where they can explore the museums and art galleries. But unfortunately for many, their idea of a summer holiday will be spending it in the park. Now that can be nice, in the short term, and I'm sure the novelty of a park probably goes away after 6 weeks. But that means those educational chances that they did have, with no real sort of homework projects, because you switch teachers between years, that can mean that learning and that routine that children have got used to is forgotten. And we've seen that during the lockdown. Of course, there'll be different, forms of teaching. Some people will have been able to access online learning through Microsoft Teams, which I'm yet to use, but I will be using Microsoft Teams for the first time tomorrow, so I'm very excited about that. Or through Zoom, which I would say I'm an expert at Zoom now. I use it so many times, and it's just so simple for someone who's not a technological genius like me, so that's really useful. And you've had that particularly at private schools, where almost lessons, as much of the school day has been replicated online as possible. People have been able to log in at 9 o'clock, there'll have been a register, and they'll be doing their learning properly until 3:30. For others that have been sent through paperwork, that probably isn't getting marked. They might do that. The motivation to do that might be limited, and it's clearly not as effective. And then for some people, there won't have been any work at all, maybe not even contacting the school. And I think that is really horrific. And you have to look at it even in the best circumstances. Those that have been going to private schools, their lessons have moved online, probably because the schools are aware they need to justify why their parents are paying the thousands of pounds they pay each term. Even that won't be the same. It is tricky. And I've mentioned this before. It is tricky for a teacher to gauge which students are and aren't understanding the content. It isn't possible to do that in a team session in a way that it is easier to do that in the classroom. Now, of course, in the classroom, that can be tricky if a child isn't forthcoming about the struggles they're facing, but online, that's really difficult. And these are for children that are supposedly having the best circumstances. So I think we have to recognise these huge educational inequalities that were already the case before lockdown, but that have been really exacerbated by lockdown. And now I'm all for sort of more government investment into the education system, but of course it is how it's spent well, whether the tutoring will be effective from that £300 million, and the £700 million that's being spent does seem quite vague. It's where is it going? How will it help children? And it's not just about children. As if you're an adult, it doesn't matter whether you have children or not. These next generations could be the ones that are saving your life. So we all have a reason to pay into that system to help the education system. We benefited from it. The next generation is benefiting from it, and we may benefit from them in the future. They're the sort of leading scientists, leading historians, leading thinkers that are going to make the 21st century a better place. So I'm going to see a sort of deficit for that. And you're noticing it in universities too. The University of Warwick will financially suffer, as will universities across the country. And I particularly do feel sorry for year 11s and year 13s who are meant to be taking their GCSEs and A-levels. These were exams that were part of the routine. That August, we'd always see people jumping for joy in the newspapers as they received their results, and that clearly isn't going to be the case today. It'll only be sort of provisional results. And I think that is worrying for those that do, go into higher education next year or do go into sixth form, because part of a child's results, correct me if I'm wrong, you may know more than I do, but part of their results when they're going, to the regulators to decide what grades a child should get will be affected by the average performance of a school over the years. Now, that could mean for a child that's very clever and astute, but they're at a failing school, a very poor school that's often had poor GCSE or A-level results, they could have been doing really well in their practice assessments, getting A's, A stars, 8s and 9s. But the regulator could decide, well, this grade is clearly being inflated. This child comes from a failing school, so we're going to drag it down to a 7 or a 6. Now, that could be a difference between a child meeting the grades that they need to go to their university or go to their A-level college, the difference between them meeting it and not meeting it. So you're going to see children suffer because their schools have typically been poor performers, even though they may have done well. And that is really, really unfair. It is sort of such an injustice. That is one of the sort of fair things in a way. I know there are many things about the exam system that aren't fair, but it's one of the fair things in a way that the marker doesn't know what school you've come from. They don't know how hard you worked. It really is what you put in on the day, along with some coursework. And that's, of course, great if you're one of those annoying individuals that's able to get really high marks without doing any work. I'm certainly not one of those. I want to get a mark I'm proud of. I have to work for it. That's great if you're one of those, but not great if you're one of those that either doesn't do so well in exams, or you need to put work in. So we're seeing a huge amount of educational inequality, and that's only one of the inequalities that's sprung up as a result of the pandemic. We're seeing also health inequality as a result of the coronavirus pandemic, with Black, Asian and minority ethnic individuals far more likely to suffer and die as a result of catching COVID-19. Now, while generally the NHS is free at the point of use, that isn't the case for everyone. You've had foreign nationals that worked in the NHS. Initially, they had to pay a fee. That fee has now, I think, been scrapped. Again, correct me if you know otherwise. This meant it is easier for them to test care without having to pay. But in the scale of individuals that are affected, even when you sort of control the social factors, so whether they're more likely to live in urban areas and big cities, they're still twice as likely, minority ethnics, to die from the pandemic, which I think is truly, truly appalling. And that has to form a part of any sort of inquiry that takes place, so that people are aware of what's happening, why it's happened, and what response the government could have put in to make the situation possibly better. And with this virus, you're seeing, as well as the health inequalities, the economic inequalities. It is one of the areas, I think, on the economy that the government have worked slightly better in. And maybe that's because of my ideology. I'm someone that is quite a big fan of state investment and government investment in projects. So I was quite a fan of, the coronavirus job retention scheme, where individuals were put on furlough if it wasn't possible for them to work. And so to keep businesses alive that would have otherwise had to make individuals redundant and possibly go bust themselves, people were having part of their wages paid for by the government. And that hasn't stopped some fraud. You have had cases where I think I read in the Financial Times that about a third of businesses have still been asking their individuals to work, even though part of the furlough scheme is that individuals are not allowed to work during that period. So you've clearly seen it being exploited by businesses, and if so, the repercussions need to take place. And you've also had businesses like The Spectator, which have really increased their number of subscriptions, so they've been able to pay back part of the furlough, maybe not either the furlough money or sort of loan for their businesses. They've been able to pay that money back to the government because they've not needed it, which has been fantastic for them. I'm all for a wide plurality of political magazines and newspapers being available for people to read and be enlightened by. So the furlough scheme, you've seen real economic implications. Some people are doing fine, while their stocks may have fallen significantly. Other people may have been lucky enough to, bet a certain way, because when you think about the stock markets, a lot of it is about this speculation, this prediction. We may sort of decry or mock, mystic Meg columns or, astrologers that try and predict how the movement of the stars will shape our personalities. But actually, certainly in, capitalist society, a lot of things will be shaped by predictions of what we think is going to happen or what we think isn't going to happen, and that is as much the case economically as it may be in the astrological senses, if it's the word that I can possibly pronounce. And with this, we've seen great economic inequalities, people maybe in a way having more money than usual. That is, if they've been lucky enough to be paid, because they might be not spending as much, they've got more money to save. But of course, there are no incentives to save at the moment because interest rates are so low, 0.1%. And I read somewhere that they might introduce negative interest rates where people would be actively penalised for daring to save their money, which I think is really worrying, because I do want to, defend saving as something and having money set away for a rainy day. And if the coronavirus pandemic, which has seen the UK economy at least plummet by 25%, isn't a rainy day, then I don't know what is. And we have to take that properly into account. And also inequalities because of age too. There's so many that we can think about. I'm only covering, we've only got an hour in the programme, I'm only covering sort of the bare surface. There are far too many to work through. We've got age inequalities where, of course, the older you are, this is the case anyway, the older you are, the more likely you are to die, shock horror. But also in terms of really being affected by the pandemic, far too many people that were in hospital were seen as bed blockers moved to care homes without being properly tested for whether they had COVID-19 or not. So we've seen a scandal in care homes, both in the UK and in Sweden, and perhaps in other countries too, where care homes have been rife for people catching COVID-19 and unfortunately passing away. And the fact that these individuals may have already been near the end of their life doesn't make any difference, because if it was the difference between someone living for a year longer, well, that's a year that they've now missed being with their family are able to visit with them and communicate with them, and they've had that year robbed of them as a result of catching COVID, being able to maybe catching it from someone else in their care home, or being forced into their care home where they can spread it to others, and passing away far too early. And as I say, this needs to form part of an inquiry. I want this inquiry to try and be as unbiased as possible, which sounds impossible really when I say it already does sound deluded, but not to go into it thinking we need to either absolutely hammer the government for what they've done, or it'll be a whitewash where actually nobody takes accountability. They should look at all of these different inequalities and more, the things that have gone wrong during the pandemic, our response in the UK, whether we could have done things differently, and try and assess departments that were responsible and also individuals that were responsible too, because I fear if it's just an department that's held accountable, then one person might be let off, but actually proper accountability to ensure, if there is a second wave or there is a sort of pandemic or government emergency like this in the future, that the same mistakes aren't made. And we actually, the whole purpose of having an inquiry is to hold people accountable and learn the errors, and those are things that simply have to take place. And of course, simply by raising the inequalities here, that won't solve the problem. We have to raise the fact that the inequalities exist in the first place. We want them to be solved in the future. Now let's have a look at your comments. As I say, you might have other inequalities that you want to raise. You might think things haven't been as unequal as I've been saying, and I have almost been catastrophizing things. I don't think I have. I think I've been quite proportionate in my response, but do let me know, do comment down below whether it's on Facebook or YouTube. The wonders of technology means that all your comments will appear and I'll be able to read them out. Our fantastic head of news, Enoch Makungu, has commented saying, "Morning, Noah." Good morning to you, Enoch. Hope you're keeping well. Frosty TV has commented saying, "Hi, can I listen to this in the car?" Well, as long as you're not watching it on your screen in the car, if you can get a sort of Wi-Fi connection or you have mobile data, I don't see why that should be a problem. But as long as you're not watching the screen, because I'd hate for you to cause a car accident. And really, I think anyone that sort of watches anything on their phone or is holding their phone and hasn't got it done to like a hand holder in the car, I think you should have at least 6 points on your license, if not your license taken away altogether. I am quite a sort of hard liner on that. But anyway, away from my authoritarianism on crime and to the front pages, really today looking at this terror attack, or was it a terror attack? Again, we don't want to speculate on these things too much until we know the facts and all the appropriate individuals have been interviewed. But certainly this absolutely horrific incident that took place in Reading, and it affected me quite a lot because my family originally did come from Reading. None of us live in Reading anymore, but certainly 40, 50 years ago, a lot of my family would have been in the Reading and general Berkshire area. So it is really horrific. New York, where the event took place near Reading city centre, where 3 people at least have been stabbed to death. Truly, truly horrific. And all the front pages, apparently, apart from the FT, focus on this. We'll have a look through this and see what we can gauge from it. Some information in the Metro today about the Premier League. But mainly their focus, terror in the park, and they have sort of photo, sort of wide shot of different tents where they're sort of displaying the police investigation taking place. And their sort of caption says, "Police police tents at the park at Reading Town Centre, where the knifeman launched his vicious attack. And truly horrifically, a teacher has been a victim of the knife maniac, as they're calling it. And there have been tributes to teacher James Furlong, who was one of the victims in Reading on Saturday evening, I believe it took place. And they're saying that devastated colleagues and families have paid tribute to a kind and gentle teacher named last night as a victim of the terror attack, as they're calling it, on Saturday. I think it has to be careful whether it is a terror attack or whether it isn't, in terms of terror being sort of linked to a political cause as well. But as I said, I think it's wrong to sort of speculate far too much. We saw on radio stations choosing not to do phone-ins on this topic because it would just be inappropriate for the victims and their families, for people to just be spouting their views. Well, they're free to do so on Twitter while we're not yet aware of the full events of what's taken place. But understandably, it is clear why newspapers have covered this, and it would be wrong for them to try and ignore this. But James Furlong, who I believe taught, was head of history, taught government and politics too. It's truly, truly horrific. Very young too. Just absolutely wouldn't matter what age any of them was, but truly, truly awful. The Daily Telegraph today, total football, and they've also, that's one of their headlines there. They're also saying terror suspect, apparently, as say suspect innocent until proven guilty, was on the MI5 list, according to their reports. And the security service had investigated the Libyan, who was aged 25, over jihadist fears, and there are questions about whether he should have been at large after apparently an early release from jail. And of course, the teacher being named as one of 3 people that was killed in Reading Park knife attack, and just people simply enjoying their Saturday evening as lockdown eases, being with other people, and just the most atrocious of events happening. I live very near to a park, and you just think it could be anywhere, all over front pages there at the Telegraph, lots of in-depth reportage. And as I say, the newspapers will have been very careful about what they do and don't cover. I wouldn't be surprised if every copy of a newspaper before it goes to print goes through lawyers, just to make sure, because the newspaper industry before the pandemic and during the pandemic has been really hit economically, and so they won't want any reason for anyone to sue them for libel, take them to court, and then potentially lose them quite a lot of money, which could be really damaging and eventually put them out of business. But other stories from the Telegraph, because they really, truly, they really are a broadsheet and can fit so many stories on their front page, saying that apparently expanded bubbles can reunite grandparents with their families. Well, we'd already found out about bubbles a couple of weeks ago, I believe it was, where it was individuals who are living alone. They could form a bubble, as it's called, with one other family and not have to adhere to social distancing rules. They could go inside. And so we saw wonderful videos of, grandparents that lived alone being reunited with their grandchildren. Of course, very tricky if you're a grandparent living alone. You have different children, different sets of grandchildren in different households. It's almost like you're having to choose between them, which must be an awful thing to do, almost as awful as being separated with them for all these months. And they're saying that Boris Johnson apparently will ensure that there will be an expansion to these rules. So we're seeing the number of new cases, a number of new deaths going down, which I think every single death from or with COVID-19 is absolutely atrocious, but it has to be a step in the right direction that we're seeing these cases going down, even with a weekend lag. It has been fewer cases. And also, what else is there from the Daily Telegraph? John Bolton, who says, for the first time in my life, I will vote Democrat rather than back Trump, an explosive new book that he has written that Donald Trump apparently tried to get banned, tried to go through the courts to prevent it from being published. There's so much someone for free speech who appreciates the free speech that Twitter gives him. Truly extraordinary to try and do this. And initially, I'm not sure whether I would have read it. I am interested in US politics, but I'm not yet a US political obsessive. And when I've been into Waterstones, which has been, I'll tell you more about that in a bit, when I went into Waterstones, there are always loads of US political books. But the very fact Trump doesn't want people to read it makes me want to read it, because as I've said before, I may have said it before, if not, I'll say it for the first time now, the best form of journalism, not saying the book is journalism, but the best form of journalism is that something that someone somewhere would rather remain unpublished. And so the fact that Trump doesn't want people to read it makes me think I've got to read it. A mayor apparently has pledged a huge park at the heart of Paris. Very nice. Paris, somewhere that I really want to visit in the near future. And apparently, according to the business page of the Telegraph, 400,000 firms can't meet social distancing rules. And you've seen people gradually going back to work. As I said, over the weeks and weeks, it has begun to feel busier on the roads. People going back into their offices after 80, 90 days of working at home. But if they are at their offices, it will be about adhering to the 2-metre rule, which could be, rightly in my view, reduced to 1 metre very shortly. I think that will be necessary, not only for the hospitality industry, but simply making things more practical. The Times, the game is back, big focus on football again. And according to them, the Libyan suspect in Park's his killings that he committed, he was known to MI5. The alleged terrorist fought for and against ISIS, and apparently the history teacher was among 3 stabbed to death. As I say, just reading what the newspapers are publishing, because I simply don't know enough myself to make an appropriate judgment on this, and I wouldn't want to. And they're briefly saying in their report for the Times that the attacker arrested on suspicion of murdering 3 people in Reading was on MI5's radar last year after he claimed to have fought for and against Islamic State, and that's according to sort of Times exclusive. And also a Times story, as pubs are due to reopen on the 4th of July, Independence Day, independence from our homes, go back and get drunk if that's your sort of thing to do, if you're not teetotal, saying that pubs will take names and details of drinkers, apparently. So according to Oliver Wright, who's the policy editor of the Times, pubs, bars and restaurants will have to take the names and contact details of customers before they're allowed to enter, under plans being drawn up for the next stage of lifting Britain's lockdown. I'm not sure how well that would go down with people who just, while they may give their details, have to take a reservation, to actually give details within the pub simply for the purpose of entering, if you want to sort of go and enjoy yourself. I'm not sure whether that would be most popular. The CMP Movies has commented along saying, put this on Spotify. Well, I don't know about this show, but I know other shows for all 12:51 AM or on our Mixcloud account. I'm not sure how we can do that, but we have got it all on Facebook, on YouTube, and you can watch it back, but I'm not in charge of tech stuff, so that's not under my remit, thank goodness. It is 25 minutes past 10 already, can you believe? And I want to talk about this brand new app that the government are having to, basically do a U-turn on. The government once again decided to deviate in the UK from what Europe were doing regarding the testing, tracking and contact tracing app. And it's all to do with how can we move back to some form of normality within society while accepting that coronavirus is still around us and still hasn't gone away. We are at level 3 now in the UK, 1 to 5. People are comparing it to Nando's ratings, which I do think slightly trivialises what's going on, but I also find that comparison quite amusing. Basically suggesting how can we return to an element of normality while accepting coronavirus is there. And part of that will be individuals being tested and being aware of whether they have coronavirus or not. But what happens if individuals are tested and they've gone back to work? And part of this is simply giving the contact details of people that they know they've been in contact with over the last 48 hours. If you know the time limit it is for people that you've been in contact with over a certain period of time, do get in touch. They have to give their contact details of people they know, their work colleagues, their friends and family, who they may have communicated with and will also have to enter lockdown with. But that's going to be fine for people that they know and work colleagues. But what about people that they pass on the street, people that they've been on the bus with, people that they've been on a train with? And that's where this app has come into place. It's the idea that people that you don't know, people that you can't name because it's just ordinary commuters that you might see every day but not properly chat to, it's the idea that they can be helped too, and that is really, really important. So the way people have come up with a solution to combat this is this app that would notify other people that you've been in the vicinity of someone that has coronavirus. Now, we in the UK decided to almost go ahead with our own app separate to what the European Union and other European countries were doing, which they tried it, they saw whether it would work, and almost they realised it wasn't going to work. But the worst thing about it was the reasons they realised it wouldn't work were raised in April and May. It wasn't some issue that had simply come onto the horizon last week. People have been raising this weeks ago and saying that our strategy wouldn't be effective. It's because it was almost the government against Apple, and Apple are very much, they're strong on their data protection and their privacy, which in a way I'm all for. I think it'd be right that a corporation hands over information to a government. If you're trusting your information with this corporation, do you want it handed over to different organisations? Now, of course, I know that does happen in terms of sort of Facebook and other entities, but Apple are very much pro-privacy. And so the fear was with what the government were trying to do is that they were trying to, highlight accuracy and reliability. So it would be reliable about the distance apart you've been from someone else. But that was not effective on Apple phones. I think one app that they trialled in the Isle of Wight, and it all suddenly went very quiet about what was happening in the Isle of Wight. While that did work on 75% of Android devices, it worked on about 4% of Apple devices, so it truly wasn't effective. So essentially, they've had to completely reverse that, and they've had to follow the European model, which actually allows Apple and Google to formulate this app that will ensure that life can go on as much to normal as possible, while also people are aware if they've been in the vicinity of someone they don't know but has also had coronavirus, like a fellow commuter on the bus or tube. And so it's Apple and Google that have actually been effective at doing this, and it shows what government can and can't do, as I say, to support government investment and government being involved within society. But actually on technology, they're not always the best individuals to lead this. They're not the best innovators, the best entrepreneurs to try and find technology that works. And that is where these organizations like Apple and like Google do come in. But very much they're trying to prioritize privacy over accuracy. So someone might receive a notification, but it might not necessarily be accurate. And certainly in terms of the UK, I read somewhere that this app might not even come into place until the autumn. Well, if we're going back into some form of normality now, the autumn for me starts in September at the earliest. And so you could have had plenty of chances people to communicate and not know who they've been around. And it really does, raise the sort of debate between liberty, the freedom to go around as we like, but also having the security of our safety. And part of that security will come from this technology, and the government have sort of clearly not been effective in what they want to do. Maybe it was because of a desire to always, whatever Europe was doing, to do the opposite of that, but almost believing that they could be better than these technological firms who've proven to be more effective. And as I say, even with a great app, people might read that they've been 3 or 4 meters away from someone with COVID, but choose not to follow the rules. So just because someone sees they've been near someone else on the tube, they either don't follow the rules, or they might not be able to afford to follow the rules because it would mean not going to work and therefore not getting paid, or receiving sick pay that's inefficient for their rent that they have, the responsibilities they have to their children and their families. And so there are a whole load of sort of structural problems. I'm all for, spoken about before, I've got some libertarian instinct, I'm all for individual freedom, but so much of what we do and how we live our life within a structure, whether it is a relationship between the state, technological companies, or the communities around us. So actually just to think of us as sort of autonomous human beings separate from the rest of society is an incorrect assumption to hold. So in terms of this app, again, I think it will form a key part of this inevitable inquiry that's going to happen. And certainly one of the things the government got wrong. And part of that will be an honesty that just, even though in 2016 a pandemic was listed as one of the key threats facing the UK, an honesty that they couldn't account for everything. They clearly didn't account for everything, whether it was going into lockdown too late, whether we should have gone into lockdown 10 days earlier, whether it was this failure with testing that, again, you can only trace and contact people who you've tested them. And for many, many days now, for weeks now, the number of people that have been tested has been, insufficient. It hasn't been released. It's said to be unavailable. And there was that big target for the end of April, getting testing to 100,000 tests per day. Whether that was test capability or whether that was the number of tests actually taken, it is unclear. You might know. Comment down below and let me know. We'd love to hear about it. I'm sure the audience would love to hear it too. But there was just that lack of knowledge clear. It wasn't made clear. And that is sort of really saddening and really depressing, especially for those that are in vulnerable groups that do want to work, and they're sort of working as trying to be as safe as they can. Now, of course, life comes with risk, and that's no bad thing, but it's risk that you can try and avert if possible in terms of trying to avoid catching the coronavirus. There's plenty to discuss and plenty of ways for the government to be held accountable and reasons that they do need to be held properly accountable. So as I say, do comment down below whether it's on Facebook or YouTube, and I'll read it out. I'll make sure that all of your comments, provided they're not going to get the station sued, are properly read out. And now, as it is, what time is it? 10:32, 28 minutes to 11 already, can you believe? I'm going to do my book review for this week. Now, you'll have seen on social media that this is the final front page, and I want to talk a bit about that. I'll talk a bit about that later on in the last 5 to 10 minutes. But as this is the final episode, I thought I would do what I believe to be the best book of all time, the best podcast of all time, and my favourite tweeter of all time. So I'll start off with what I believe to be the greatest novel ever written, or maybe it's more of a novella given how short it is. But I hope to read plenty more novels in the future, and that might prove me wrong. But so far, I believe Animal Farm by George Orwell is the best novel ever written. And this was written during the Second World War, actually, in the late 1943. Early 1944, but published just after the Second World War for reasons which I'll come to explain. And it follows the life of animals at Manor Farm, where they overthrow the farm owner, the exploitative farm owner, Mr. Jones. And you get the pigs, which you can see here, Napoleon and Snowball taking over the farm with the revolution. And it's the idea of all the animals coming together. They're all finally emancipated and free. And that's how it starts. It starts off with this brilliant idea of trying to make things better. All animals are equal. They have almost their version of the 10 Commandments. I think it's slightly fewer than 10 of how best to live their lives and what life on the farm should be. And that's how the ideal starts. But in reality, the situation is far different. Napoleon and Snowball end up taking over. There's a fight between them. I think Snowball is expelled from Manor Farm, and Napoleon takes over as this sort of authoritarian dictator. The animals are made to work away and building these windmills, to try and improve the situation and make things better. The worst thing about it is, though the whole book was based around trying to overthrow Mr. Jones, the book ends with the pigs sitting in the kitchen with the farmers from around the sort of local area, and the animals look from man to pig and pig to man, and they could not distinguish between them, and that's how the book ends. Sorry for spoiling it, but it is one of the most powerful phrases, and you can read it. It's called Animal Farm. I believe it's Animal Farm, a fairy story. Yeah, it's how it was originally published. Beautiful first edition cover from 1945, which if I could find that probably would cost loads, but I'd love to get that. And the reason I like it because it can just be read as an enjoyable farm story with animals taking over and corruption too. As it says here, while the phrase starts as all animals are equal, it ends with all animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others. And so it shows the almost contradictions of the revolution. But a lot of it is based on the Soviet Union, which is a part of history I'm desperate to learn more about. We learn rightly a lot about Nazi Germany and Weimar Germany, the Weimar Republic before that. And it's vital that those periods of history are studied, scrutinised and understood, because as I've said before, only by understanding history in the past can we ensure we don't repeat it in the future. Though I would say some parts of history are repeating themselves, and that is really worrying. But I think just as much scrutiny does need to focus on the Soviet Union too, which of course existed for far longer, until the early 90s. Because there are a lot of analogies between that. Napoleon is basically Stalin. Snowball, I believe it's Trotsky, whether he was killed with an ice pick in Mexico. I don't truly know whether that happened to Snowball the pig. And it shows how, although there was this great ideal, people's revolution for equality, that clearly didn't happen. And eventually you do get an authoritarian dictatorship in terms of the pigs taking over and the workers, the proletariat, taking part in these 5-year plans, agricultural revolutions to try and improve things, whether it's making windmills or industrialization. And it's completely horrific. It leads to sort of widespread famine, death, truly horrendous circumstances. And I think Orwell's making the point, which he develops further in probably his best-known book, 1984, about the consequences of power that is unchecked. And we have that in democracies. Democracy is the idea of people voting in who they like to govern them, and people in power can do what they like, but they can't do what they like because we're in a liberal democracy. That liberal part means there are checks and balances, like a judiciary. We don't have a sort of codified constitution, but there are laws about what governments can and can't do, even though they can sort of repeal most laws, but there are checks and balances in place to ensure that they have to go through parliamentary procedure and can't just enact anything onto the people. And he's basically saying the dangers of that being unchecked, of someone taking over, a manor farm, taking it over from Mr. Jones, but both not knowing how to use that power. And then when they don't know how to use that power, they almost feel they have to go to the most extreme end of it, the most extreme part of that power, and be authoritarian. I'm not sure whether it was the pig's plans from the start to be so authoritarian, but it clearly was damaging. And it's only about 100 pages long, and there have been adaptations that I do want to watch, but I think it's written so coherently, so precisely, and in an amusing way, but also leaves a deeply worrying message too about what can go wrong if things aren't properly scrutinised. So it really, really is enjoyable, and I've got this sort of lovely Penguin modern classics here, and I feel like modern classics is a bit of an oxymoron. Surely if something is modern, it's not classic, and if something's classic, it's therefore not modern, but maybe you'll know otherwise. But yeah, great copy here, and a really, really great read. As I say, only 100 pages, and you really should read this one along with George Orwell's 1984 and his other books he published, because he died at 46, but even though he was only 46, died very young, but wrote so many books, so many articles, so many essays, and has so many thoughts I'm desperate to explore and delve into, because even though these were written 70, 80 years ago, lots of them are just as relevant, if not exactly relevant today. And that's one of the wonderful and frightening things about history. So Animal Farm, a fairy story by George Orwell, what I believe to be the greatest novel so far that I've read ever written. Now it's 10:37, and let's take a look at some more of the front pages today. Have some tea. And The Guardian today, Martin Lewis, whose money saving expert website, I believe, is just brilliant and essential. I've got this sort of dreams about going travelling as the pandemic reduces in significance, and European countries especially open up their borders. There are some countries that I'd like to see, so his money saving website is brilliant for that. And in The Guardian today, he's got financial advice to survive a pandemic, and clearly, the pandemic, as we were saying earlier about the economic inequalities, has raised so many issues that we simply weren't aware of before, things that we never thought we'd have to account for. Like, nobody knew what furloughing was. Companies weren't aware that they could do this and that they could rely on the government to pay people's wages. I don't think the government were expecting that either. But again, The Guardian today, as with all the other papers, leads on the suspect in the Reading Park attack being on the MI5 radar, and according to their reports, it was known to security services and other authorities. It was a radar of MI5, and it's sources telling The Guardian whether these are sources from NI5 or outside is simply unclear. And also today, Heather Stewart, the political editor, follows the Times talking about the scan as you enter plan to allow pubs to reopen. So whether it's both sort of maximising or understanding the capacity of people that are within pubs, they do that for supermarkets. It's not your personal details, but they are aware of how many people are in the shop at any one time. But also in case of someone who goes to the pub and then catches the pandemic, letting other people know that they've been exposed to this person. Now, the virus may have passed them or it may not have, but at least people are aware of that. And also The Guardian today revealing how austerity has hit Labour areas hardest. And they're talking about how Labour councils have borne the brunt of local government cuts in England over a decade of austerity, according to analysis by The Guardian. And they've highlighted for the first time how poor, largely Labour-held areas of the country have had their funding slashed on average by more than a third, while affluent areas that are largely conservative controlled and more protected. One of the things that fascinates me about British politics over the decades is how things have changed very much from 2010 to 2015. The focus was on, the necessity of austerity, deficit reduction, having a long-term economic plan, and people were willing, for the money that the government spent, and therefore how that affected their local areas. They were willing for that to go down. But since then, especially since the EU referendum, language of austerity and government cuts has completely transformed. And I think it's because the voters, the Conservative Party especially, rely on had changed, where they could rely before under David Cameron or sort of more socially liberal middle classes that supported free markets and capitalism. They instead rely a lot, especially since the EU referendum, on perhaps working class Leave voters who, while they may be socially conservative, economically do support investment and intervention by the state. So you saw that reflected both in Theresa May's campaign in 2017, that clearly didn't pay off, but also in the Boris Johnson Conservative campaign of 2019, where he was so victorious on the back of that mandate, both of getting Brexit done, which I can say a lot about, but also about spending more in police and in the NHS, although many of the cuts that he was pledging to spend were simply reversing what had already been cut by his party over the last decade. The Irish today, plenty of front pages. Again, main headline: Park terror suspect had been under surveillance, and the intelligence services were apparently alerted to him last year, but an investigation was scaled down after he failed showing up with the jihadist group. And tributes paid James Furlong, the history teacher, one of the 3 people killed in the attack. And apparently some unarmed police officers have been praised for their bravery after tackling a knife-wielding assailant. And apparently the PM, the Prime Minister, is promising changes to the legal system if there are lessons to be learned from the atrocity, which of course every atrocity should teach us things. And some other front pages, some other headlines on the eye: English pubs may reopen for Independence Day. And football too, and apparently China is winning the digital Cold War, perhaps, according to Ian Birrell, brilliant investigative journalist. And George Anagaya, who's a brilliant presenter of the BBC News at 6, who's written about writing, racism and living with cancer. I think one of his forms of cancer briefly returned, or has recently returned, which is truly awful. And someone writing about small talk, and apparently hot dogs are the breed most at risk from heat stroke, as it gets hotter and hotter, and it is a beautiful day as I look out my window this morning. Daily Mail, who are apparently the daily newspaper of the year, saying apparently there's a free Amazon Fire 7 tablet you can win when you join the Mail Plus. And a Libyan refugee has been accused of knifing 3 to death and apparently did want to join ISIS. And all about the fact it was on the radar of MI5s. Could they have done anything? And again, I think that would be part of an inquiry, an investigation into what's happened and what the police got right or wrong, as well as the security services in the way that they responded. And then a brilliant photo of the Duke of Cambridge, Prince William, and the Duke of Edinburgh, Prince Charles, soon to be king, the Prince and his glorious royal Father's Day photos, page 2 and 3. So I think, generally appealing to the Mail's readership in terms of, who will get them and who will win that sort of support. Hannah Keate commenting along, saying, "Hi Noah." Hello Hannah, thank you very much for tuning in. 10:43 is the time now, and I briefly wanted to talk about the US election, which I can't remember whether I've discussed it before on Raw during these sort of 9 weeks of doing front page. I know that we've talked about it certainly on Insight back in January and February, and I probably mentioned Donald Trump plenty of times, but I did want to briefly mention the US because it is less than 5 months to go now until the election that will take place in November. Apparently there's no law in the Constitution for delaying the election. It meant that people would be disenfranchised because they weren't able to access their local polling station as a result of having COVID-19 or potentially being exposed to COVID-19. Well, you know that it will be Donald Trump for representing the Republicans against Joe Biden for the Democrats. And it's extraordinary to look back at the US election campaign, which of course normally starts with, people, it starts internally with the Democrats nominating their candidate and the Republicans nominating their candidate. And that's only fully confirmed in July at the sort of national conventions before they spend 4 months as presidents going head to head in all these different debates. And it's fascinating looking at the Democratic nomination process when there were all these candidates running. It was assumed that Joe Biden, who'd ran twice before for president in 1988, where he was accused of plagiarizing Neil Kinnock's speech, and again in 2008, eventually where he wasn't successful, but he was President Obama's vice president. It was assumed that his campaign was doomed to fail. It was Bernie Sanders, Pete Buttigieg, Elizabeth Warren who were in the ascendancy. And they were all doing so well. In Iowa and New Hampshire, Joe Biden simply wasn't performing well. But then you get to Super Tuesday and suddenly he pulls it out of the bag. I think you have many of the more centrist candidates worrying that Bernie Sanders, who is seen as a radical on the left, though, compared to many of what the left represents in the UK, he wouldn't be seen as, as left-wing as those people, as part of it is relative to country. We are far more, I'd say, liberal country than they are in America. So I think fears of Bernie Sanders going up against Donald Trump and losing meant that you have many of the moderate candidates like Buttigieg, Amy Klobuchar pulling out, and therefore the centrist vote that was sort of more split within the Democrats went behind Joe Biden. Maybe they saw that, his experience, the fact he'd been vice president before, may have meant that he was able to win over people. And then you had that, it was, just before the pandemic, really, that it was assumed that it would be Joe Biden and that Bernie Sanders would be forced to pull out, which he's now done. And polling recently for Joe Biden has been quite good. America has got by far the most cases. You've had tens of millions of jobs lost, people signing up for unemployment. And even though the economy is starting to reopen, it is truly, truly awful. And I'm trying to predict ahead to what I think will happen in November. And the answer is I simply don't know. I've always said, I said before the 2016 election that I thought Trump would win because I got it wrong over Brexit. And of course, while there are so many differences between the UK and the US and Brexit and Trump, and I know it's not good to compare the two, I assume because Brexit had happened, that increased, I thought, the likelihood of Trump being elected president. And so I predicted Trump would win in 2016. At the moment he took office, I said, whatever happens, he'll win a second term. And I still do believe that. I don't want that to happen. I think he's been a truly appalling racist president. I knew from the start that he wasn't fit to hold high office. And I think he has proven that time and time again over the last nearly 4 years. Can you believe? I still thought that he would be able to win around the road that he won in 2016 and win them again. Now, recent polling would show that is unlikely to happen, but then much of the polling showed that Hillary Clinton to win the presidential election in 2016, and that didn't happen. And I think a lot of it will come down to whether people are voting on the basis of the pandemic. It was Bill Clinton, one of the advisors to Bill Clinton, who said elections are all about the economy, stupid, and clearly economically America is in a dire state, as straight as the rest of the world. So it will be whether voters, look at the pandemic, look at the state of the economy, but reflect that America is simply going through what other countries are going through, though of course in a far more severe way, partially, no thanks to Donald Trump. And it's whether they blame that on him, whether they blame that on a deep state, because many of his voters will be conspiracy theorists, not all of them by any means, but some will hold sort of conspiracy theorist views both over COVID-19 and the fact that President Trump is being blamed. And it will also be in how they approach Joe Biden. Do they see him as a Democrat, so they're never going to vote for him? Do they see him as part of the Democratic establishment, so they think, no, we voted against this in 2016 with Hillary Clinton? Or do they vote against Hillary Clinton in 2016 because she was Hillary Clinton, because she was seen as part of the Clinton dynasty, which has a real reputation? Although Bill Clinton was able to win re-election in 1996, that clearly wasn't the case for Hillary. a successful electoral record as a senator in New York specifically, where she was, only had to appeal to one state rather than the whole country. So there are already a lot of questions to be raised, and those questions have only been heightened over COVID. I fear that there'll be, I want a big revival in America after COVID. I fear that Trump will be able to use a small economic revival that countries are able to go through with, individuals spending more, able to go on holiday more than they were, certainly from March to June. And we use that small economic revival as evidence for his successes as president, which I believe are next to none, and who use that as evidence for why he should be allowed a second term to continue the work. And so I fear that may lead swing voters who would have voted against Donald Trump in 2020 to sort of lurch back behind her and realise that the economy wasn't destined to go down the plug hole completely by November, and that it has, it is slightly better, even though it'll be a fraction of where it was at the start of this year. So it really is unclear. I do want Joe Biden to be the next president. Certainly, if I was in America, that's who I'd be voting for. He has plenty of flaws, not least the allegation of sexual assault, which does deserve full scrutiny. I'm surprised that even in the COVID-19 pandemic, it hasn't received the attention it's deserved, because it does at least deserve much scrutiny. And I also think, clearly he's aging. Donald Trump and Joe Biden are old, so a lot of significance will come down to who Joe Biden chooses as vice presidential candidate. And that's something that I haven't really understood, because I think part of having a vice presidential candidate is that you choose someone who will win out parts of the electorate that you might not otherwise appeal to. But surely those people that wouldn't be appealed by the president, they wouldn't be persuaded by who the vice president was, because they'd be aware that the commander-in-chief would be someone that they didn't like. So it'll be interesting to see how effective, if the vice presidential pick will be effective or have any impact on how well Joe Biden does or doesn't do. But I fear even if he does win in 2020, he might decide not to run again in 2024. So that, again, is a real impact on who the candidate is. And we do need to be aware of that, because, we know it's Donald Trump and Mike Pence as the vice president. We know it's the two of them. We need to know who Joe Biden's running mate are. So there is that sense of equality. You'll have presidential debates and you'll have vice presidential debates that need to take place. So I think the US election is something that's going to grab the attention of the world, and rightly so, really, because it is, truly the impact of who becomes US president does affect the rest of the world and what does or doesn't happen in the future. So it needs that scrutiny, it needs that attention from the world, and hopefully it needs a Joe Biden victory. But I wouldn't be so sure. I still think it's Donald Trump to lose. I hate to say it, but I think he can still win again in November. Now it's 10 to 11 already, can you believe it? I will take a look at the last few of the front pages. Daily Express today. Over the last 9 weeks, they consistently said that they're backing NHS and care workers. They say they were off sunny Spain. First Britain's return to beaches, and Spain, of course, very popular holiday resort for UK individuals going travelling. So it'll be interesting to see how Spain, which we have family in Spain, they rely so much on tourism from the UK, see how they're impacted or not, as well as many UK individuals. I think maybe 400,000 that have second homes in Spain or that have moved to Spain. So clearly, going to be reliant on whether they can come back to the UK or whether they can go to Spain if they've been sheltering here in the UK. Another photo on the Daily Express that mirrors the Daily Mail in terms of Will's show of love for Charles. Big royal fans in the Express and Mirror, Mail papers rather, not Mirror. And terror attack suspect known to MI5, kind and inspiring teacher among 3 victims of half stabbings, according to the Daily Express. So it is really sort of crucial, that MI5 link, and the fact of being known to the security services. I think that will really in exacerbation highlight the response to this attack, what happened, what the government didn't know, what they could have done to potentially avert it from happening, and the mistakes that were made potentially, as I say, but we don't want to speculate too far. Daily Mirror today, the heart of Britain, saying what's it really like to be black in Britain today, and important that issues like Black Lives Matter are continually raised, even though they're no longer at the front of the headlines, they're probably further in the paper, if in the paper at all. It's important that those issues are continually raised and discussed, and that legislative change, they ought to take place in the UK and across the world. So it's good that the Daily Mirror are apparently doing a compelling new series about what life is like in pages 22 and 23. Horror in the Park. As terror attacked a suspect on MI5's radar, a Libyan exile known to the security service, and an inspirational teacher among the 3 dead. And the Financial Times say one of the only papers not to cover it at all, saying that apparently Black Lives Matter has gone global with another trade war soon and people working from home. Rishi Sunak is also poised apparently to cut spending after a summer of stimulus. Apparently there might be a VAT reduction in July, and that took place also in 2008 after the financial crisis there. VAT was cut from 17.5% to 15%. So I wouldn't be surprised if it was reduced today from 20% to 17.5%. And a picture of Donald Trump taking stock after low turnout at a Tulsa rally, mainly because people on TikTok and K-pop fans apparently, according to Twitter, voted, they reserved seats but then didn't bother showing up because it was partially to troll the president, which I thought personally was rather funny. And then finally, the Daily Star, their thought for the day, quite different to Thought for the Day on Radio 4, saying that NHS angels deserve a holiday. Well, I couldn't agree more. And saying Costa Bravo, trio of NHS angels had a mass run to the sun yesterday. Spain reopened its doors to Brits. Holiday makers stuck in lockdown for months booked flights within minutes of receiving restrictions being lifted, which is simply brilliant. 3 months COVID fight in Spain, and where better to celebrate that. And what else to say? We'll do our last cultural recommendations. I have got to do my podcast for today, my favourite podcast. And this is something that I just have some more tea and anticipation. This is something that I listen to every week without fail. Well, it's now twice a week, and it is the For the Many podcast from LBC with the LBC evening presenter Ian Dale and the former Home Secretary for Labour, Jackie Smith, Cabinet Minister under the Blair and Brown years, was MP for Redditch, and then Home Secretary for 2 years under Gordon Brown. And this really, really is fantastic. It is what a political podcast should be. They look at the events of the week, although, as I say, they've increased their podcast to 2 per week, Wednesday and Saturday, during the coronavirus pandemic. They look at the events of the week, the musings on it, they offer their analysis, their astute reflections, and they also answer plenty of questions. They normally answer my questions, which I like a lot. They choose mine, even though I think some listeners are starting to notice I do, tweet them with my questions, and that they maybe have my questions answered a bit too often compared to theirs. But they're really, really friendly, really bubbly. They really get on well with each other, and they're not doing it together. Jackie's normally in her home in Great Malvern in Worcestershire, and Ian's at his home where he's been isolating in Tunbridge Wells in Kent. So, they're hundreds of miles apart. But the fact, despite, through the wonders of technology, which again, technological inequality is not everyone being able to access, and move online. So many people truly left isolated from the world. Of course, technology can't compensate for real social interaction, but it's better than nothing for people being able to communicate together in lockdown. So as I say, I digress. But Ian Dale and Jackie Smith really are able to communicate together well and to bring a refreshing take on the news. It can often be 1.5 hours, 2 hours of them together. Lots of laughter, lots of sort of questions from listeners. It's been going on since I think about November 2017. It's a very long-term podcast, and I particularly like the programs they do at the end of the year, where they do the year in review. So they reflect on the events of the year more generally, January through to December, and they also do their political awards of each year, where they award, best politician, best minister to watch, MP to watch, and worst minister too. So they're not willing to be, they're willing to be critical as well, and ministers as well as supporter of them. So I really enjoy that. And my tweeter of the week, it always has to be, and it will always be, my favourite Twitter page of all time, the Very British Problems page, which also acts as a Facebook page too. And they truly are fantastic. So many of the tweets they put out, I think it's run by Rob Temple, I think is his name. He's truly fantastic. I think he got a Channel 4 series for it too. And every single tweet that he does, I feel I can relate to. It's about British quirks and eccentricities of being British, the sarcastic things we say, the desires to go shopping or meet up with someone when we secretly don't. But if you just type in twitter.com/so very British, all of the tweets will come up, and they're an amusing, rollicking read that get lots of deserved retweets and likes, because they're so universal. They transcend the generations, they transcend wherever you live. They're relevant to all of us living in the UK and this sort of awkward life that we inhabit in terms of how we communicate with others and how we behave. So I really, really enjoy it. I find them so wry, so witty. I just think, if only I could write tweets that were like that. And mine are normally slightly incoherent, but I do enjoy writing them anyway. So as I say, best novel of all time, Animal Farm by George Orwell. Best podcast of all time, the For the Many podcast with Ian Dale and Jackie Smith. And the best tweeter of all time, the Very British Problems Twitter page, which is at So Very British when you look on Twitter. Slightly out of breath, so I'm going to take another tea. It's not just because I want another tea. as we come up to the last few minutes of it, Jenny Minute Brown has commented along. Thank you so much for tuning in. And she said, I'll miss Front Page and news topics of the day. Yes, because we haven't heard earlier, this is the last edition of Front Page, can you believe? I've absolutely loved doing this run of 9 shows every Monday. It's really added some structure to my Mondays during lockdown. I remember going on the radio for the first time back in November. I think I mentioned this on the first episode, and it was to discuss the general election and offer my predictions about what happened. I think I've written about whether Jeremy Corbyn really wants to be Prime Minister, which while he may have wanted to, the public certainly didn't want to. And it was brilliant to take part in that discussion, be in the studio, offer my thoughts, and know that even though it was pre-recorded, that was soon be on the air, and it was getting a voice that was able to try and talk coherently, offer a different view. And I've absolutely loved it since. I've loved being a guest from January through to March, all the different news shows, and I've really enjoyed doing this show for myself. It's been lovely to have that comment and have those feedbacks, and also try and give my opinions on the news, be opinionated, understand it. It's okay to have plenty of opinions. That's part of living in a free society, and while people might not agree with what I have to say, actually they've got the space to comment. It's really brilliant, and I think I've enjoyed looking through the front pages too. I hope I've put them across in a honest way, reflective of what they're trying to say, but also understood that every paper, part of being in a free press, that the papers are biased. They'll have their own opinions and their own editorial pages that will affect what they decide to put out and what news they choose to prioritise. And that bit of culture too, we fundamentally are a news show, but that cultural aspect is so important in terms of having, books to read and podcasts, and they're just as important in or out of lockdown, I believe. So I think the elements of it work together really well, and I really love the feedback. I've got to, thank some people. Thank you to, Enoch Makungu, our brilliant head of news, who's so dedicated to Raw, for offering me the chance to do a news show in the first place and giving me that confidence after being a guest to, go on the airways. And I have to thank also Rian, who's our brilliant program controller, for finding a space for me in the schedules, because we've got plenty of live streams, but also plenty of pre-recorded podcasts that go out on the Mixcloud, and just the Raw team generally, who've all been so friendly, and people, supportive radio geniuses, people who do it so well. They make it sound effortless when they present to the world, because potentially the world can listen. You can listen to Raw from all across the world. I wouldn't say this is goodbye, even though this is the last front page, because it would be week 10 and we are in normal times. I do hope to be back on Raw in some way, shape or form, hopefully in the form of actually being in the studio from September, and who knows what we'll be discussing. There'll be so much to discuss. But as I say, thank you so much for tuning in over the last 9 weeks. It has been a pleasure to have your company. Do follow me on Twitter at Noah Keate here about all of my musings, and who knows, maybe I'll be a guest and have my own show soon, hopefully in the not too distant future. But until then, remember, front page, no, not front page, Raw 12:51 a.m, in or out of lockdown, it's the place to be. Thank you so much for listening. Bye-bye.